Thank you. Thank you. It's so good to be here this morning with you guys. I have a confession to make. I've only been in this building one other time, and I'm pretty sure it was in the mid 90s, and I know it was for a Jars of Clay concert. So that probably dates me a little bit. But it was a fabulous concert, and I think I sat right up there in the balcony. So it's good to be here in this room with you, not at a concert, but on a Sunday morning. I'm really honored and delighted. So thank you, Andrew, for sharing your space with me today. So
You can tell them to not be alarmed. We're going to do the offering at the end of the service.
okay, do not be alarmed. There will be an offering at the end of the service.
I know that they're really excited about giving.
Because you thought you were going to get away with it, but you're not. You're gonna get the opportunity to be super generous this morning. So that's good. A little bit about me. Like Andrew said, I am married to an amazing man named Jim who always opens doors for me, sometimes literally, but the doors I'm so grateful he's opened for me are really ones like this. Jim and I have pastored for probably about 15 years now, and as we moved into roles of youth pastoring and lead pastors, Jim was quick to share his platform and pulpit with me and just has been one of the biggest empowerers in my life. So I'm really grateful that God blessed me with a husband who's willing to stand behind me and open up doors for me. So I was really hoping he'd be able to come down this morning, but our lead pastor at the Stirring, Nate, is preaching in San Francisco this morning, so Jim is preaching at the Stirring. So he is there along with our 3 kids. My oldest is Brennan. He's 18. He's a senior in high school. Pray for me. I find myself in tears all the time at the idea of him leaving home and moving on. And I secretly hope in my heart that he doesn't move away. I really would be glad if he just stayed around for a few more years and just called home for a little bit longer. So, and then Madison, our middle one, she is the rose between 2 thorns. She's 16. She's a sophomore in high school. She's a powerhouse. She's super creative, and I love watching how the Lord continues to unfold and develop who she is. And then Hudson is our God-given surprise. He's 10. We thought there was going to be 4 Baileys for a really long time, and there ended up being 5. And Hudson came along, and he's 10 years old. He's in the 4th grade, and Hudson talks. He makes up for my 2 teenagers that don't ever talk right now. Hudson talks and talks and talks and talks. And if you're at our house, particularly at dinner time, the famous last words are, Hudson, eat your dinner. In other words, stop talking. Give somebody else a chance to talk. On the off chance that your older siblings would like to say something to us tonight, we would like to give them the opportunity. So Brennan, Madison, and Hudson, they're the best job that God's ever given me, the best gifts he's ever given me. So that's a little bit about my family. I grew up in Redding. I am a California kid. I graduated from high school in Redding. I graduated from Simpson, met Jim at Simpson. We married. We were on staff at Simpson for 5 years after we graduated. We were planning on being missionaries. That was our whole goal and directive, and somewhere in that process, the Lord really redirected us, which was a really interesting season of our life, and called us to stay. Which was not a welcome invitation to us at the time. We had high hopes of serving the Lord anywhere in the world. The last place would have been Redding, California at Simpson College, then college. But the Lord called us and asked us to stay. So we stayed. We were there 5 years. We had Brennan. When Brennan turned 1, we hightailed it across country to New York. Just at the Lord's bidding and seasons shifting and changing for us. We moved to New York in the year of 2000, and Jim served as the campus pastor at Nyack College, which is the sister college to Simpson. We were there just a few short years that honestly felt like 30. But it was a good season. It was a growing season for us. And from New York, we ended up in Kansas City, Missouri. Never in my wildest dreams or nightmares had you ever told me I would end up in the Midwest. I would have reminded the Lord that I would have preferred Africa. But we ended up in the Midwest, landlocked, right literally smack in the heart of the country. Kansas City is almost the epicenter of the United States of America, east to west and north to south, and spent 10 amazing years there. We started out as youth pastors at a very large church, And that church went through some significant change and transition in leadership. And through those years of change, we ended up being the lead pastors of what became just a very small, family-friendly community church. And we pastored there for 7 years almost before feeling the Lord beckon us back home. And we were really, really hopeful. We felt like the Lord released us and said, go home. We never thought it would be Reading. We were just hoping to land on the West Coast somewhere and be in driving distance of our family that are all still in Oregon and California. But the Lord literally took us right back home and plopped us right back into Reading. And we've been serving at the Stirring for 4 years now. And it's just been such a gift to be home, a gift to be near our families, and a gift to be at the Stirring. It's definitely where God has us for right now. So what I do specifically at the Stirring, I lead a movement that we call Emerge, and it's just part of our discipleship arm of the Stirring. And every year we run the school year, we run a year-long intensive for people that just want to explore, activate, and discover the leader within them. And so we just launched on Friday and Saturday night of this weekend. We have 38 students that are participating, and it's a real intensive personal program. And it's probably one of my most favorite things I've ever been allowed to do. It's just a blast to walk with these people and see how the Lord intersects his life with their life and his plans and purposes with where they are at in their journey. So that's just a little bit about me. I wish I would have brought a picture. You would have got to see my family, but I did not get that far. We started school this week. How many of you started school this week? This was our first full week, and my kids all started sports. So by the time I hit Friday, I was like, oh my word, we've got 8 more months of this. I've got to remember how to do it. So anyways, I hear you've been in the Gospels, and as I prayed and asked the Lord, what do you want to share? What do you want to speak? There's so many great stories. I love stories about Jesus. I just love to see what he did. I love to learn about him. I love it when he takes me deeper into things that I've heard my whole life, having been very much a church kid. There's so much about it that feels overly familiar, and sometimes when I crack open, especially the Gospels, I think, I could recount all of these stories, Lord, really word for word, and I even remember what the flannel graph looked like when I was in first grade. So it's always fun to ask the Lord, what's your word, both to this place, but to me as well as I dive into it. So I felt really drawn to Matthew chapter 14. It's a very familiar story, if you're familiar with the Gospels, where Jesus walks on the water. And we land in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. It's in a really intense season of ministry for the disciples and Jesus. John the Baptist, who is Jesus' forerunner, has just been beheaded. And right on the heels of that is the really infamous story of when Jesus fed the 5,000. So Jesus had a very full, probably week or 2 or 3 of ministry and give out, and they had just preached and ministered to a crowd of 5,000 and fed them with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, and the Lord multiplied it, and there was baskets of food left over, and they're winding up the day, and you have to know that Jesus and the disciples were probably really ready for some space. And so Jesus, at the end of that story, Jesus directly and very clearly gives his disciples some instruction. He says, it's time to go. I want you to go. I want you to go first. So get in the boat, go across the lake, and I'll meet you on the other side. And so the disciples in this story that we're going to be in, the disciples climb in the boat, and they're sailing out on the lake, getting ready to head to the other side to presumably meet Jesus there. And while they're out on that lake, the wind begins to pick up a little bit. And it says that there just were contrary winds. And if you're out on water and the wind begins to blow, the waves begin to pick up. So it wasn't a real peaceful scene that they were in. And for some of them, they were probably really comfortable with it. They were fishermen. They'd been on the water their whole lives. But for some of them, it probably was a little bit scary. And so that's kind of the scene of the story that we're walking into. So I'm going to read it to you. Matthew 14:22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they cried, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So we see the disciples fully immersed in being obedient to Jesus. Jesus had said, "It's time to go. I want you to go across the lake." So they climb in the boat, which is how you get across a lake, typically speaking, and begin to sail to the other side where Jesus was wanting them. And we see in this moment that they're in obedience. That in their obedience, and they're just, Jesus said, go, they're in the boat, they're moving. So there's a lot of obedience happening in the boat right now. There's 11, 12 disciples. We know they're in the boat, they're sailing, they're doing what God asked them to do, headed in the direction that God asked them to head in. And when we obey, we grow. When we obey, obedience is important, right? When you're raising kids, you train them to obey you. There's a training component to obedience. And while this seems like just a simple instruction that God gave them, that Jesus gave them, there was more to the story, as we're aware of. They didn't just get in the boat, sail to the other side, and find Jesus, but there was this divine interruption that happens in the context of their simple obedience to the Lord. And I want to focus this morning specifically just on Peter. And I want to take a real close look at Peter's responses to Jesus and Peter's responses to the scenario and the situation that he's in. Peter's in the boat that Jesus told him to get into. He's going in the direction that Jesus told him to go in. And like Peter, our obedience is very significant and important. When we obey the simple instructions of the Lord to us, the simple, clear instruction of God, when we obey, we align ourselves with his will and his purposes in our life. And a lot of times as parents, when I'm disciplining, when my kids were younger particularly, a lot of times I just wanted them to obey me, and there wasn't a bigger purpose necessarily other than just their compliance to what I needed from them in the moment. I didn't necessarily have a bigger plan or agenda or will that I wanted them to fall in line with for the day or the week, that their obedience in that moment hinged on. I just wanted them to obey. I wanted them to learn to hear my voice and do what I said, because that's part of growing up. You learn to surrender, you learn to yield, you learn to obey. It's a discipline, and we start when our kids are really little. And so Peter, like all good kids in their growth and development, has learned to heed the voice of God, and in his obedience, he has aligned himself with the greater will and purpose of God. So our obedience is very significant and important. What we discover, like Peter, often when we walk in obedience with the Lord, when we're obeying, when we're in our boats, headed in the direction that God told us to head in, we often discover, like Peter did, that there's more to Jesus than we thought. When you read through the story, you see that they're in the boat, they're heading in a direction, and who shows up on the water? Jesus. Jesus shows up not in the boat, but he begins to walk towards them. And they can't even place it. You have to know that when the only rational explanation is a ghost, it's not a very rational scenario. And that's the only thing that they can think is happening to them. We're seeing a ghost and it's walking to us on the water. It's not a very good rational explanation, but it's safe to say they probably had never seen anything like this before, right? So they're in the boat, they're in obedience, they've aligned themselves to the will and the purposes of God, and all of a sudden Jesus comes walking towards them, and in their fear and in their not understanding what's really going on, they deem Jesus a ghost, and they begin to just cry out in fear. You can imagine the conversations that were on that boat. It must have been really funny to Jesus. And Jesus has compassion on them, though, and it says he immediately says to them, "Hang on, it's me, guys. Don't be afraid. It's all okay. You're okay." And Jesus speaks to them and dispels their fear. In our obedience, Jesus will often take us further in him. In our simple acts of obedience, Jesus will often utter an invitation to us that will take us further into him. They were in the boat heading in the direction of God, that God had asked them to. When Jesus shows up on the water out there, walking towards them, but Jesus is out there. And Peter, when he gets his wits about him, Peter goes, you can kind of hear the dare and the challenge in Peter's voice, which we know to be somewhat true about Peter's personality. And Peter says, Lord, if that's you, tell me to come. I want to come. If you can walk on water, I want to give it a shot. Right? What a good kid. That's the kind of kids we want to have. If you can do it, I want to do it, right? So we hear this dare and this challenge in Peter's voice. And Peter says, Lord, if that's you, tell me to come. I want to come. And there's something going on in Peter's mind where he understands that if Jesus tells him to come, that Peter's understanding of what will happen, the implications of what he would normally expect to happen if he climbed out of a boat onto a stormy lake, that Peter suspends that understanding in favor and in submission to Jesus' understanding of what will happen if Peter chooses to climb out of that boat. That's a really big deal. Climbing out of that boat is a really big deal. I don't know if you've ever done anything that you kind of look at and go, talk yourself into it, but it feels like a really big deal. And there's that moment where there's that point of no return, and you're kind of stuck in it until it's done. Anybody ever had those kinds of experiences in their life? A few years ago, we were with our youth group in Kansas City, and we'd actually brought them out here to California. And as part of their experience, we decided to take them rappelling. And I love a good dare, I'll confess, and I love a good adventure. It's in my nature. And so I was really excited about this. I've done rappelling a little bit before and some rock climbing, so I feel fairly comfortable with it. But this particular scenario, we were going to rappel in a cave. And so you had to go into the kind of top of the mountain, and they harnessed you all up, and there was a big hole right in front of where we were standing, and you had to shimmy yourself backwards down into the hole. And then when you got down through that hole, you opened up into a cavern that they said the Statue of Liberty could lay sideways in. It was that big and that tall, and it was a cavern, so it was pitch dark. It was really, really black. So I'm watching this going, I like rappelling, but I like to see where I'm going. And it's really kind of strange to shimmy yourself down in a hole and you can't see where you're going and you don't know what it's going to look like. And they told us, you're going to get down through the hole and you're not going to have anything to push off to get your rope to release. So you're really going to have to make yourself swing a little bit. And I was like, oh, Lord Jesus. But I was really excited about it. So I did it. But that feeling, that point of no return was when I got my harness on and you're halfway down in that hole going, I can't climb up, I have to go down. And it's that point of no return. Peter's willingness to climb out of the boat was a really, really big deal. There are times when we are in the boat, when we are actively obeying what God is telling us to do, and we are moving in a God-given direction, when an unexpected divine come resounds in our hearts. And it was Peter's obedience to the Lord to get into the boat in the first place that led him to the opportunity for the invitation to come to a place in the beyond. Had he not obeyed the Lord in a simple way and got in the boat, Peter would have missed out on the opportunity to hear the Lord say, come on out of the boat, Peter. Come walk on water with me, Peter. So our obedience is very, very important. So Peter climbs down out of that boat and he begins to walk on water. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that moment, what it must have been like? I just think, what in the world, that moment when you put both feet on that water and it's not firm ground, what happened? Did he sink a little bit? Did his clothes get a little wet? Did he kind of like you do when you're standing in 2 feet of water, kind of move through the water that way, or was he on top of the water? I don't know, but I think it's really fascinating to find out. And Peter begins to walk on water. And he's facing towards Jesus, and the invitation to Peter, from Jesus is come on out. Come to a place beyond where you're at. I have more for you to experience. One of the stories that my family likes to tell a lot that does not always shed me in the best light. I don't know how old I was. I have a younger sister and a younger brother that are 5 years and 7 years younger than I am. And we grew up on 5 acres of land, and we had a pond that was seasonal. And so it was in the spring. It was right around Easter. I remember that. So the pond, which was mostly just a big mud puddle, had a little bit of water in it, and it wasn't deep at all. It probably didn't go past your ankles, and you could walk all the way through it in the mud on the other side. And I remember being down at the pond with my brother and my sister and my cousin, and just decided to dare my brother to see if he could walk on water. And we were down at the pond, and we were just chatting. I don't know what we were doing, but I got this idea to dare my brother, Jeff. I was like, Jeff, let's see if you could walk on water. And I was the typical big sister that could convince my siblings to do just about anything, that a penny was worth more than a dime, and all of that kind of stuff. And so I convinced him that if he had enough faith, he would be able to walk on water. And so he's standing there, and he throws up his hands, and he goes, Dear Jesus, help me walk on water. And that little boy took off running, and he did not walk on water, and he went plowing through the mud and the water and just was drenched. And I thought, oh, my word, you don't realize the repercussions till you're done. And I thought, I am in so much trouble. And we had company that night. I remember that, and I remember telling Jeff, you have to sneak in. Don't let mom and dad see you, particularly mom. Don't let mom see you covered in mud. Just go change, and it'll all be okay, right? So, but there was a part of me that was kind of curious. I remember thinking in my daring my brother, what if the Lord just decided to make a little redhead boy named Jeff walk on water? What if he just would? And so when Jeff did not walk on water, there was a little part of my heart that was a little bit disappointed, because there was that what if in me. What if it happened again? What if my brother took off running and actually walked on 2 inches of muddy water? What if? And I love that invitation to us in that story, the what if, that God comes to us when we're in our obedience and we've aligned ourselves to his purpose and his plan. We're walking in obedience, that God comes to us and he says, come on out. I have more for you. There is more that I want you to experience. And for some of us, like Peter, it feels like a really great dare. And sometimes it depends on where you're at in your life and in your season. Sometimes it's a wonderful dare and a wonderful adventure to go on. And other times it just feels really hard. Like, Lord, I see you out there and I want to be with you. But that process of getting from the boat to out there is really hard. The implications of my life when I leave the boat and move out there are kind of a big deal. And yet the Lord, because he loves us, it is his delight to grow us and train us and develop us. Because he loves us, he gives us an invitation to more and to come. So Peter's walking on the water, and what happens? You guys are quiet. Peter's walking on the water, and the waves begin to come. And he gets aware of his surroundings. The reality of what he's done hits him, and it overrides the reality that he was in at the moment, that he could walk on water. So Peter is overcome by fear, and he begins to sink. And Jesus says to him, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And I don't know if you're like me. A lot of times when I read that passage, when I hear those words come out of Jesus' mouth, I hear a really strong rebuke. Like, you of little faith, why did you doubt? It comes across as a really stern rebuke. And it was interesting to me to find that when you dig in the Greek a little bit about that comment from Jesus to Peter, it's actually not really a stern rebuke at all. It's a really tender kind of comment. Like a parent would say, oh, buddy, you almost had it. You almost had it. You're almost there. So Jesus is not condemning Peter's lack of faith at all. He's saying you just need a little more confidence. That's really the context of that comment. And so Jesus says to Peter, you almost had it. You almost had it, buddy. You're almost there. And I love the heart of Jesus in that to us. His heart is to partner with us. His heart is to grow us and develop us. I believe in the church. I believe in the church like I believe in few things. I believe that we are here on earth for a very specific reason and time and purpose. I believe that we are called to build the kingdom of God, that as we live our lives in submission to Him, as we get in our boats and move in the direction of God, and as we hear His invitation to come and we're willing to climb out on the boat, that God is going to build His kingdom through us. I believe that with my whole heart. And I believe that it is God's very great delight to come to us and say, come on, guys, come on out. Step out of the boat. There is more for you. And He knows what we don't. He knows that we can already do what we're terrified of trying. And He knows that sometimes we have to stop and go, wait, I'm in the boat because you told me to be here and now you're out there. But sometimes God does that, and He invites us to come meet Him out there somewhere. Come to me out here. There's something I want you to experience even in the process of meeting me out here. Come to me out here in your marriages. As you pray for your marriages and your relationships and your family, we do our best and we pray and we go, Lord, where are you? And God says, I'm actually out here and I want you to meet me out here. I want you to meet me out here and I'm going to give you strategy for your marriage. Lord, my family is troubled. There's things going on in our relationships that are hard. My kids are struggling. My friends are fighting for their lives. Cancer is difficult. Lord, where are you? In the context of our lives and our obedience to Him, God often says, come out here to me. Come to me out here. Meet me out here and see if I won't meet you. When I was praying for my time here with you guys, a lot of times when I pray, even just for people, the Lord will give me just a real simple, clear sense about what He is doing and about what His invitation is. And if you haven't already guessed, I just felt like the Lord was saying, man, I want Chico Neighborhood to meet me in the more. You guys have been here for a long time, and some of you are probably not old timers to the church, and some of you are, and that the timeline doesn't really matter. But you're here because you've aligned yourselves in obedience to God. You're in the boat, and you're moving in the direction of God. And I believe that there's a season of invitation coming both corporately and personally to many of you, where Jesus is going to say, come on out of your boat. There's a more. There's a place in the beyond that I want to meet you in. For some of you, it's in your marriages. For some of you, it's in your family. It's in relationships. For some of you, it's in your job. For those of you that are serving in church and ministry, it's in ministry. For some of you, it's in prayer. There's such a deep sense of the more in prayer. God's heart for us is wide and long and high and deep. And as we respond to His invitation to climb down out of the boat and into the more, there's more for us. And it put me in mind of that passage in John 14:12 where He says, I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I'm doing and will do even greater things. And so as we align ourselves and we do what Jesus is already doing, then we get the invitation to the greater things and the more things. Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. All things. So when the invitation to more comes to you, you've already been guaranteed success. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. There's a few keys in here as we end that I just want to point out to you by way of, if the invitation of the Lord is more and it's coming, how do we position ourselves to be able to be men and women that can climb down out of the boat? Because that's a really big deal, right? I think it is. It struck me on Wednesday. I was in my office and I was praying and working through this. And there is an area of my life where I've been talking to the Lord about, where I've sensed His invitation into more. It's a next step, if you will, into things that I feel like the Lord's been inviting me into. And I realized that my roadblock there was not, I wanted to go. I want to go. I want to go to Him where He is. But I'm having a really hard time with the implications of that right now. because there are implications to climbing down out of that boat. And Jesus knows my heart, and he knows more than anything I want to meet him in the out there. But there's some implications between the boat and out there that I need some answers to. And I felt like the Holy Spirit just said to me, I'm not answering them. Peter didn't ask Jesus a whole bunch of questions. What's going to happen if I climb out of the boat? Am I going to get wet? Am I going to sink to my knees? Am I going to walk on water? Are you going to catch me if I fall? Am I going to fall? Am I going to float? Am I going to fly? I don't know. He didn't. If he asked Jesus those questions, we don't know about it. But what we do know is he got down out of the boat and he walked. And so for some of us, in the all things, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It's a good thing to be in the boat, and it's a good thing to hear the invitation of the Lord to come out and to come beyond. And some things we can do to position ourselves to be ready for that invitation so that we are able to climb down out of the boat are this. Understand that you can do all things. But he is not always doing all things in you all the time. It's oftentimes just one thing. He's doing one thing, and he's calling you to come into one area. And so take off the pressure of having to do all things and ask the Lord, what is the one thing you are calling me into right now? What is the one thing? Pay attention to the one thing that he invites you into. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. When Peter heard Jesus' voice and understood that it was Jesus out there on the water, he kind of thought, I think, I don't have too much to lose. I've got a boat behind me and a man in front of me that clearly can do things I didn't think he could do. So what have I got to lose? But it was because of Christ's presence and his voice that Peter found the ability to ask Jesus, tell me to come, and I'll come. Tell me to come, Lord, and I will come. If I hear your voice, if it is you, if your presence is with me, if you are out in front of me an arm's length away, then I know I can climb down out of the boat. A key in this is cultivate your intimacy with him. Tend to your intimacy. It is key to you being able to step out of the boat and into the more. Faith is important. That sense that wells up within us that goes, I got this, I can do it, I'm going to go. Faith is really important. But what grows your faith is your intimacy with him, your time with him, your understanding of who he is in all the seasons of your life. His word and his truth, that you've seen him act on his word and stand on his truth time and time and time again. And as you lean into those places and experiences with Jesus, you've got that thing that wells up in you called faith that helps you make those movements to climb out of the boat. Tend to your intimacy. Sometimes, this is just purely my own opinion, there's absolutely no theology attached to it whatsoever. Sometimes I think God invites us to come to him to out there, to the more place, because he has a purpose in it. There's more that he wants us to experience him in. But I think he really loves it because it requires us to just hang on to him, to go deep with him, to tend to our relationship with him. There was a whole exchange that happened between Peter and Jesus that we don't ever even hear about because no words were exchanged. But as Peter climbs down out of that boat, man, if I was Peter, my eyes would be locked on Jesus. How far away? How many more steps between you and me? And you know there's a whole nonverbal exchange going on between Peter and Jesus in those moments. Tend to your intimacy. It is key to your ability to climb down out of the boat. He loves to be with you. He loves to be with you. He loves to speak to you. He loves it when we open up his word and we read a story we read 1,000 times and we find ourselves all in it all over again in a fresh way. That's all that revelation is. He loves to reveal himself to you. And I believe that for many of you, as you hear God's invitation to step into the more, it's also an invitation to go deeper into your relationship with him. There are mysteries for you to explore in him. There is a depth and a height and a length to his love that he wants to unfold to you that you can't even imagine. And the impact and the implications of it on your life will empower you to keep moving out on the wind and the waves. He does so much more in us as we say yes to his more. Well, we think we're saying yes to one thing, and sometimes it feels like a really big thing. It's a really big deal to climb down out of a boat and walk on water. But what was going on in Peter was so much more than just his discovery that he could do something totally supernatural like walk on water. He's finding out that there's more to Jesus. There's more to this man than I thought. There's more to me when I am with him than I thought. There's more to you when you are with him than you thought. So this is my prayer for you, Ephesians 3:18. I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the saints to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. Some of you hear him very clearly. Some of you know that you know without a shadow of a doubt that you are in the boat. You are headed in the direction of God. And he's going to come and he's going to surprise you in some really unexpected ways and say, come on out. I've got a more place for you. And you get to have this whole exchange with him like Peter did. And some of you already know what the more is. You see it out there. You see Jesus out there. You know it's him. You're pretty confident in what Jesus can do, maybe not so confident in your ability to copy it. But like Peter, you get the opportunity to respond back to the Lord and go, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come. And that's the invitation to you today. All you got to do is say, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come. Because I know if I hear your voice, I will come. I will be so compelled and so moved, I will come. And some of you have already climbed down out of that boat and are walking on water. And I just want to bless you in that. There are depths and heights and lengths and breadths that God's going to continue to unfold for you in prayer and in your workplace and your places of influence. The Lord's going to begin to open up doors of opportunity because he delights to partner with us. It's how he does what he does, is in tandem with us, his kids. Amen? Why don't you stand with me and I'll pray for you. Father, what a privilege to be here this morning, Lord, with these men and women. Lord, what a privilege to just be in a room with family, Lord, with sisters and brothers. God, what an honor to just see you in their midst, to know that you are here. Lord, to encourage them, to hear your invitation to them, to step into the more. Lord, that they have moved in obedience. There's been an alignment to your will and your purposes, and there's invitations for more coming. And so, Holy Spirit, I ask, like you did with Peter, that you would give them the courage to go, Lord, if that's you, would you tell me to come? I pray that you would anoint their intimacy with you. I pray that you would give them the discipline and the fortitude and even just the desire, God. Sometimes our desire for you wanes. We confess that, Lord. And we ask, Lord, that you would increase our desire for you. And that as we desire you and tend to our intimacy and tend to our relationship with you, God, you will reveal more of who you are. We get to learn and discover that there's so much more to you than we ever thought. Change us, and we bless you in that, Jesus. Lord, and I pray for my sisters and my brothers who are already down out of that boat and walking. I ask for an anointing, Lord, to go deeper. Lord, to push through the wind and the waves and to keep their eyes on you and to keep moving into the horizon with you. Lord, that you would so position the men and women in this church to have phenomenal influence over their families and over their neighborhoods. and over their schools and their places of employment, Lord, that your kingdom would begin to grow and gain more momentum here in Chico. That there is a movement, God, to what you are doing that picks up speed as we pick up our cadence with you. And so I bless my friends with your presence, Lord. Give them ears to hear your voice and eyes to see you, and a confidence that knows it's you and that you will always meet them in the beyond. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.
All right, you may be seated. As we transition, do you want to thank Amy on our behalf?